Dooby-doo. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, I'm back. And you can still hear me. Hooray, because nobody could hear me before. Well, as I said, welcome to anybody who has joined us already. And thank you. There you are. That's what we're doing this week. Merchant of Venice Part 1. It sounds like an exam, doesn't it? Maybe it is for me. But anyway. So, as usual, we thank the wonderful Allegheny Foundation who have made these webinars possible for a whole year, which is wonderful. We'll do them anyway, but we're really grateful that Allegheny have put up the funding for this. And we also remind you that we would love you, even though the webinars are free and we will never charge for them, we would love you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, because the more subscribers we have, the better. And also it gets the word out, because if you've subscribed, your friends might subscribe as well. And that's really important, spreading the word.
It also gives us closed captioning at 1,000 people.
Yeah.
So, helpful.
So anyway, let's see who's out there. Anybody out there yet? Say hello. Yes. Oh, there's James. James, ever reliable from White Oak. Always with us. David, wonderful. A warm and sunny Stratford-upon-Avon. Actually, Stratford-upon-Avon, when it is warm and sunny, is one of the most beautiful places. Deeply envy you. Although it is warm and sunny here and very warm. In fact, the other day it was high 90s, which is sort of pushing 33 degrees in European money. It's gone down a bit, but it's going to be the same again next week. So we're having a warm time and a slightly wet time in Pittsburgh. Hello, Barry and Mary Lou in Shadyside. And Shelley, nice to see you back. I love seeing all these people coming back. I know that a lot of people can't make the 2 o'clock on Friday anymore because, the COVID restrictions have reduced, so people have other things to do, including work. But it is gratifying that so many of you then catch up with it on the YouTube channel later on. And it's wonderful to see how many people do use the YouTube channel to see it, not just here in Pittsburgh, but across the United States and du monde, around the world. So that is really wonderful. Speaking of around the world, there's Grace from Dublin. Hi, Grace. There's from the far-flung reaches of Greensburg, there's Dennis. Hello, Dennis. And thank you, Allegheny Foundation. Bless you, Allegheny Foundation. Even though Greensburg is actually not in Allegheny County, but it's great that you're thanking us. Always feel free to make a donation. You can do it on the website. It's terribly easy. We make everything as easy as we can for you, especially donations. And every donation matters. I keep saying, no matter how small it is, it matters. Every dollar counts. And if you could afford $5 a week, give us $5 a week. I'd be thrilled. That would be a wonderful donation over the year. So please, please, please consider giving us a donation. It's our 25th season coming up, and we have special events planned, and we do need your help. Helen, hi there. It is nice and sunny, and isn't cool lovely after the week we had prior to that. Lovely you're on board, and Helen, I believe you celebrated a birthday, so happy birthday to you. Yes, Greg, I think those words will always ring in the head of anybody who has ever done or seen The Merchant of Venice, although I, of course, will have an opinion about them. I may not be right. Everything I tell you may be wrong, but I will have an opinion. Rebecca, hello. And Pat from Oakland, hi there. So as this is a 3-part one this time, so we're going to be going into a little bit of depth about the about the play. This is part 1. But it's one of those plays. I've got a point about the play that I want to investigate and discuss with you. So that's why we're doing it as a 3-parter. And James, hello from Crafton. Thank you for 16 months of your wonderful attendance. It's wonderful. Thank you. I do this because it's what I do, and I love doing it, and I love talking about theatre as much as I love practicing theatre. And if I keep practicing, I'll eventually get the hang of it. But what I do love is the people who stick with us and listen in. The whole point about these, I keep repeating, is not to lecture you on what I think is right, but to talk with you about what I think may be wrong, may be right, but to open a discussion with us all. And actually, last week, when we talked about the first of the 7 mysterious and wonderful plots of Journey and Return, or as I call it, There and Back Again, I got some very interesting emails. I haven't had the time this week to reply to them all, but I will get to them over the weekend. So I will respond to last week's emails that I haven't responded to. The longer ones I want to spend a bit more time pondering. But very interesting points being raised. And it's wonderful that we do that, because that's the purpose of the webinars. We open up discussion and we start thinking about the things that we thought were right that may be wrong. And that includes me. Somebody asked me the other day about teaching and why teaching was so important to me. And I said, very simply, because it's by teaching young minds, I learn more. Because young minds question everything. And that's the purpose of the exercise, question everything. I may not change my mind, and I might change it radically. But the important thing is, just as we do with the plays that we discuss, or the theatrical positions that we discuss, we may change our minds. And I certainly know that as somebody very cruelly pointed out to me recently, the more than half a century that I've been doing this professionally, and it was a very cruel thing to say, I've changed my mind on almost everything, because that's how you grow, that's how you develop. If I was still thinking the way I thought half a century ago, I would not be much use to anybody. Keep thinking. Keep thinking. And when you think and you see change, take the change, because that's going to lead us to a new theatre, and a better theatre, and a wiser and richer theatre. However, that's my homily for today. I'll now start talking about things I may not be sure of. Ken, hello, welcome. Yes, it is a gorgeous day. Who's that? Debbie, hello. Hello, Debbie. How are we doing? Oh, it's 5 past. The latecomers are now officially late, so we will make a start on our topic, which is The Merchant of Venice. But I put a subtitle on it, Where Does Justice Lie? And in this context, I'm using the word lie in both its meanings, because one of the aspects of this play I want to talk about is the question of justice. And how just is justice when it is applied within the context of this particular play. And when justice does exist, where is it? What is just? And how is just best exemplified? Now, being a playwright of remarkable skill, ability, understanding, and perception, Shakespeare never wrote just a simple play in his life. All of them have underlying context, meaning, potential interpretations. Every one, all of Shakespeare's plays have been discussed, analyzed, and debated, and dissected, and reconstructed, and reinvented, almost from when he first wrote them. Not quite, about 100 years later, when he was rediscovered and reestablished. But since that point, everybody has had new opinions, fresh opinions, different opinions, even down to whether he wrote the plays or not. I don't care. Somebody did, and it was one person, and whoever he was amazing. But The Merchant of Venice, just as much as any of the plays, maybe not Hamlet. Hamlet's probably been covered by more commentators than any. But The Merchant of Venice has raised so many questions as time goes by that it's worth taking a look and asking, okay, what was he up to when he wrote it? What did he think? What was his opinion? And I am prejudiced on that point in that I think that he was infinitely more liberal than the times he lived in. And there's a lot of evidence for that, because in many of the plays, you could see him skirting issues that were politically sensitive, especially when you consider the reigns of Elizabeth I and James I, the two monarchs who were the absolute government under which he existed and lived. So much of what he wrote was borderline risky in terms of the society in which he lived, the laws under which he lived. And the same with his colleagues and other writers. Marlowe had the same problem, but so did Greene and various others of the period, and going forward into to Webster at a slightly later point. They all had to work within what we would now understand as what is socially acceptable, what is socially correct, and what is legally possible. And that hasn't changed for theatre in 400 years. In fact, it probably hasn't changed for theatre in 2,500 years. What you can write, what you can't write, and what you can get away with. This particular play is dated somewhere between 1596, 1599, just prior to the turn into the 17th century. We know that because of when it was registered for publication, when it was registered, what we would now call copyright. And we know the period of writing of other plays around that time. Interestingly, now here we'll come to the first major point. In the first folio, which was that wonderful first collection of his plays, it was classified as a comedy. And I hate those classifications personally, just as a practitioner. The comedies, the tragedies, the histories. The histories are not historically accurate. There are certain historical accuracies within some of them. For instance, you take a play like Julius Caesar, has a lot of historical accuracies. Antony and Cleopatra does too. But they're not historic documents. They bend the truth, and they do that thing of, some characters have been amalgamated for ease of presentation, that kind of thing. But certainly the Henriade cycle, which, from Richard II to all the way through to Henry VIII, that whole cycle of plays is far from historically accurate. And some of it is politically correct. For instance, he turns Richard III into a hunchback, crippled monster, which he probably wasn't. But he had to be the villain of his play because he was killed and followed onto the throne by the usurping Henry VII, but Henry VII was the Queen's grandfather. So you had to be careful how you wrote about that. You had to bend truth a little. But he didn't write Richard III to be a history. He wrote it to be a political play, which is what I prefer to call all of them. They are all plays about politics and warmongering, and war is created for political reasons. So I would take pretty much all the history plays as we know them and say these are the politics plays. You can say that the tragedies are tragic in that pure Aristotelian sense, because there is a hero who has a fatal flaw and falls victim to his own hubris or her own hubris, and is destroyed because of it. But then Richard III is also described as a tragedy as well as a history. King Lear is by no means historic on any level whatsoever. But that you have these problem plays as well, like Pericles and Cymbeline and what have you, that don't quite fall into any pure category. And some of them that are just comedies, Comedy of Errors being one. It's one of the first of the, you might call, of the modern era, starting at the period of the Elizabethans, an example of what would become pure farce. and it is a genius comedy. But you also have plays of irony, and I would cast Titus Andronicus as one of those, even though it's gruesome and there's an awful lot of slaying going on. Smiting and slaying happens right the way through it, but it also has elements of incredible ironic comedy. So let's come back to Merchant of Venice. How do you categorize it? Is it a comedy? No. It's not it is a technical comedy in that there is a problem, a dilemma, and a character of resolution who puts it all right at the end. But on that level, you could say Macbeth is, because Malcolm comes to the throne at the end of Macbeth and puts everything right. In Merchant of Venice, it's Portia. But is Merchant of Venice a comedy? No, I don't think it is. I think it is a political play. And this is where the debate comes. And I'm going to expand on this a lot in the next two programs. Today, I just want to lay out the groundwork of where we want to travel with this thought. And it is just a thought, and it's just my thought, and I may be wrong. It's more remembered not for its wit and charm, aspects of comedy, as for the dramatic moments in it, the moments of tension, the moments of fear, the moments of hatred. The most famous speeches in it come from the mouth of Shylock and Portia, the "Hath not a Jew eyes" speech, the "Quality of Mercy" speech. These are moments of high drama, not normal comedic fare. We can look at the next big question, and I'm gonna the second half of this today's webinar is going to be a series of questions for me, not for you. By the way, I must apologize because my notes are slightly incomplete, because having had a hell of a morning and a very busy day yesterday, I arrived back about 2 hours ago to my house and realized I hadn't saved my notes, and I had to rewrite the whole thing from memory, and I think I've got it, but I'm not sure. So bear with me. Shylock is, of course, the principal protagonist of the Merchant of Venice. He's not the Merchant of Venice, that's Antonio, but Shylock is the principal character, the principal protagonist. So one of the arguments that has raged down the centuries is Shylock a goodie or a baddie? Is he an antagonist or is he a victim? Now, at the time the play was written, the late Elizabethan, early Jacobean period, English society, and I quote from the source of all wisdom, Wikipedia, was that whole period was described as judophobic. As far back as around 1300, slightly earlier, Edward Longshanks, the famous Hammer of the Scots that we saw in Braveheart, expelled all the Jews out of England. And Jews were not allowed to return to England until, not legally allowed, until after this play was written. It was an Act of Parliament, I'm checking my notes, 1656, and it was Oliver Cromwell who brought or permitted them to return. One of the great poets of the Shakespearean period, John Donne, who was the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, a magnificent, wonderful poet, he who wrote "Send not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee," which is the conclusion of the Sermon on Death, "No man is an island entire of itself." That John Donne gave a sermon that perpetuated what became known as the blood libel, the totally unsubstantiated anti-Semitic lie that Jews would ritually murder Christians to drink their blood to achieve salvation. Now, this was one of those great fabrications. I know that we wouldn't have fabrications like that in our present time and under our current system, and no president would ever propose anything so hideous. that it's like saying, that all Mexicans are rapists and murderers. But that's what happened. That was the society in which this play was written, in a world where Jews were not only vilified, but literally banned out of the country. In Venice, which is where he set the play, although I would add the point that just because the law said they couldn't be in England, they were. But in Venice, Jews, for instance, had to wear a red hat all the time when they were in public, so that they could be identified. This notion of making them wear something so that you could see them on the street. They had no privacy. They had no opportunity to be anonymous. If you were Jewish, you wore a red hat. That was somewhat repeated many, many, many years later when Jews were obliged to wear a yellow Star of David in Europe. And they were forced to live in one enclosed space. We get the word ghetto from Venice. The ghetto in Venice was the origin of all our uses of that term, ghetto. Now, you might say that Shakespeare followed the tradition. At one point, and it's in the quarto edition, the play was sometimes known as The Jew of Venice, which would suggest that it was a slight copycat of Marlowe's Jew of Malta. And one interpretation, a fairly constant interpretation of the play over a long period of time, was that Shakespeare was meaning to contrast the mercy of Christians as opposed to the Old Testament notion of vengeance from the Jew. It's possible Shakespeare, it is argued, I don't agree, it is argued that Shakespeare meant Shylock's forced conversion to Christianity was a happy ending for Shylock, because as a Christian, the audience would understand he was now saved, his soul was saved, and he would be able to enter the kingdom of heaven. And therefore, the solution to the play was a happy ending for Shylock. That was then. Now, that begs the question, did Shakespeare think that? Well, it can be argued that he did. I mean, there is evidence in the text to suggest it, if you take the text at face value. But if you delve, I think you may find a different solution, because more modern interpretation, more considered and less politically motivated interpretation, or interpretation that is subject to less political pressure, if you like, would read Shylock as a sympathetic character. And that Shakespeare was actually writing a play seeking tolerance. At the trial, and I'll be discussing this in depth over the next couple of weeks, and we'll be doing some extracts of it for you. At the trial, one might say that justice lies in the untruthful sense of the word. Portia, for instance, has no right whatsoever to be in that courtroom at that trial convicting. That's a lie. That would stand up in any court of appeal. It was an unjust trial. There is certainly clear and precise prejudice against Shylock. The characters who attack Shylock and declare that he is dishonest and anti-Christian are actually using lies and distortions in order to win the case and to convict him. Shylock never pretends to be anything other than what he is. But I would argue, and we'll come to that again in a while, that Shylock becomes more of what he is as a result of the events that unfold than he was at the beginning. In other words, I would argue that he becomes more committed to his Jewish inheritance as the play progresses because of what is done to him under the Christian ethos. And one of his great moments, and we'll again discuss this next week, one of his great moments is when he describes himself as a Jew and points out that in just about every aspect of living, he is no different to a Christian. Because like a Christian, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer, if you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? I love that. Right in the middle of that. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? Everything that Shylock says in the first half of the play is to say, I am no different to you, except in one respect. In one respect, I have a different faith. I believe in the same God, but not in the same Savior. But in every other respect, I am just, if we are like you if I'm like you in all of these other things, I'm going to be like you in everything else. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what's the Christian's choice? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, we follow your example. So right the way from the beginning, Shylock is setting himself up as in fact a character of reason and decency, and most important, honesty. His sense of justice is not a lie. His sense of justice is actually painfully true. Now, it is almost impossible, in fact, dare I say, actually impossible, to decide whether the sympathetic reason of opinion about Shylock, that he is a victim, or that he is a weakened antagonist. It's almost impossible to work out which one was the original intention. So you can only go by assessing what you think Shakespeare felt about many other things. And to me, when I read Shakespeare, when I look at the plays, I always scratch the surface and you find a reasonable man writing, a man who looks at both sides of an argument and tends to come down on the just side of the argument. All of Shakespeare's characters are complex. He didn't write, certainly for his major character, and for an awful lot of his minor roles, he did not write just a simple person comes on, says a few lines and walks off again. And any actors who have spent a lot of their time working with Shakespeare knows that that's true, that you can search within the text of almost any character of reasonable substance and find a human being lurking underneath it. So when he writes multi-faced characters or multifaceted characters for so many of the people, the real people that he creates, you have to say, well, Shylock can't just be a villain. There is no such thing in Shakespeare as simply a villain. Only twice, and I have said this before, Shakespeare describes a character as a villain. The first is Iago, the second is Aaron the Moor in Titus Andronicus. But when you examine them, when you look at them, you find they're not just villains. There is a logic and a behavior, a pattern of behavior, and a record of existence behind them that turns them into something far more than just a villain. And if that is true of Iago and Aaron the Moor, it's certainly true of Shylock. Shylock has so many aspects to his personality. He is so complex. It must be determined and a deliberate effort on the part of Shakespeare when he wrote it. If he just wanted to write a villain, I don't believe he could have done so. I think he saw humanity with such depth and clarity that it was impossible for him to write what we might describe as a commedia-like basic character of the bad person, the good person, the sweet person, the angelic person. It wasn't in Shakespeare's capabilities. And the fact that Shakespeare also emphasizes how basically difficult life was for Shylock in the society in which he lived. he becomes almost a tragic figure, almost, because he tries so hard to be just like one of them, to be just another guy doing his business, making his money, feeding his family, looking after his own interests, helping his friends. He wants to be just like the others, but they won't let him. That's the tragedy. They won't let him because he's a Jew, because he's different, because he's not one of us. So one may also argue that it is not only a tragedy and a comedy and a political play, but it also deals very clearly, very precisely with racism. And that's a modern view of it, because now we're so conscious and aware of the effects of racism. And it has become to such an extent a very part of our existence, part of our lives, part of our daily existence, that we are only now sitting up and saying, hang on a minute, we are. Shakespeare was writing this as well. It is there, it is inherent within the play. And the danger Shakespeare, I believe, is explaining to us. He's saying, you've got to look at this. You've got to examine it, because there is an inherent danger. And this is where some will interpret Shylock as a villain, some will interpret him as a hero. But I come back to that simple quote. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should be his sufferance? By Christian example, why revenge? The villainy you teach me, I will execute, and it will go hard, but I will better the instruction. If you treat me as less than human, I will treat you as lesser, because I am copying the example you have given me. Now that is a warning. That is a warning from a very thinking, philosophical playwright saying, be careful. Be careful what you do unto others, because they will do it unto you. And so we have already, and from my simplistic brain, we already have 5 or 6 layers of what this play could actually be about. However, even if that wasn't Shakespeare's plan, even if he wasn't being so liberal and modernistic, the play itself forces the audience to ask questions. And I've never known a production of it, and we did one ourselves a couple of years ago, and we'll be having some of the actors joining us in the next two webinars. I've never known an audience to walk out with the same opinion. The same audience watching the same performance on the same night will walk out of that play with very differing opinions. It activates the imagination in such a profound way. It makes you ask, who is good, who is bad, who is true, who is false? Where does justice lie? Is the final judgment on Shylock justice? Does the final judgment show mercy? And these questions, it's extraordinary. I've talked to people coming out from various productions, including our own. You never get a clear answer. You never get a clear and precise, well, that's what the play is about. It just asks so many questions. It is disturbing. But we must remember that the trial is not, well, I'll come to that. The trial represents what Elizabethan Christians believed to be the Jewish desire for justice contrasted with the Christian value of mercy. And he uses these two words very precisely, that what the Christians offer is mercy, and what he demands is justice. So, how are we doing? All of this, I'm a bear without my coffee. All of this sets up a whole series of questions. And I'm going to talk about some of them now, and then hopefully over the next couple of weeks, we're going to try to, not to answer some of them, but to give opinions on some of those questions. Because obviously what I would love you to do is go see the play if you can, read the play if you must. Well, you must read the play. If you think you know the play, go and read it again with these kind of questions in your mind. Because I think it's one of the plays of Shakespeare that is a really important document about society, and especially about the way we live today. He happened to write a play in which the principal protagonist was Jewish, but that principal protagonist could have been Black, could have been Puerto Rican, could have been Mexican, could have been Chinese, could have been Japanese in World War II, could have been. It's a play in which we, the audience, with our set of values, are set up with another, whatever that other is, who has slightly different beliefs, slightly different opinions, slightly different justifications. If you don't understand that one, there's a simple view of that one. How can such and such people do such and such things? It's just not Christian. Well, they're not Christian. They have a different set of beliefs and a different set of opinions and a different set of values. But we always tend to judge by our own values and our own beliefs. It is terribly difficult. It's very human to do that. I mean, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying it's human. That's what we are. But what a play must do is not just question the other's beliefs, but must also question ours. A good piece of theatre asks difficult questions. And if you can't answer the difficult questions, it may be because you don't have an answer. And if you don't have an answer, you better find one. And that's what Shakespeare's warning us in this. So let's start with a few of those questions. Is the play anti-Semite? There's your first question. Is it actually against Jews? Is it against Jewishness? Is the play saying, because the protagonist is Jewish, he is a villain? And as I said in this introduction, yeah, you can argue that it is. You can argue that what is put forward in the play is particularly anti-Semitic. It is particularly anti-Jewish because it appears that the Jew involved puts up a really wicked proposition which the stupid, innocent Christian falls for. And that's what you've got to follow through on if that's what you believe, if the play is anti-Semitic. Is it pro-Semitic? Is it pro the Jew and the philosophy that the Jew expounds? Is it in favor of that? Because what he expounds is, whatever you do to me, I will do to you and worse, because that's what you've taught me to do. And is the play saying he's right? Because if he's right, then anything that is done to a lying Christian is justified under that rule. And we all lie. We all get it wrong. We all cover up. We all are protective of ourselves, of our family, of our friends, of our species, of our whatever. If it is pro-Semitic to an exclusion of all other argument, then it becomes deeply prejudiced as it would be if it were anti-Semitic. Is it about justice? Which is a big question. Is it about what is just? Justice is that which is just, that which is balanced and fair. We set up laws. We have courts of justice. We have a Supreme Court of Justice. Almost every Western country has what is now described as a Supreme Court, because we set up what we considered, or what we generally consider to be, a just and fair rule book for how a country should be run and how its population should be treated. In most countries, we would describe that as a constitution. And we have justices who decide whether what we do is in line with that rule book, the constitution. So is this play about justice? And if it is justice fairly served? Because justice, to be fairly served, must be served equally. Justice before the law. That is a fundamental human right, as we consider it in our Western civilization. That we are all equal before the law, and that the law should be applied justly and fairly upon all of us. Is it a play about justice? Does justice get truly served within the play? Is it about mercy? One of the strongest images that comes out of the play is that speech, "The quality of mercy is not strained, it droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed, it blesses him that gives and him that takes." Mercy blesses the giver, mercy blesses the receiver. We should all be merciful. We should be merciful to one another. We should forgive one another. We should forgive one another regardless. We should turn the other cheek. We should behave. The Christian ethos, that fundamental ethos that comes down from Jesus of Nazareth, is love one another equally, fairly, show mercy to one another, treat one another as you wish to be treated. There are two sides to that argument. But is this play about mercy? Is mercy demonstrated within this play? Does the play, I'll be coming back to all of these points, does the play contain a love story? Many people would say yes. In fact, it might contain a couple. You have the early elopement of Shylock's daughter Jessica with a Christian. And you also have the story of Portia and those caskets and Bassanio. Is that a love story? Are they love stories? Or does it contain a story about a marriage in order to protect property, which was much more common at the time, much more recognized at the time, much more prevalent at the time, that fathers would marry their daughters off in such a way that the property was secure and safe and stayed where it was? I'll come back to that. Is it about retribution? Is it about getting your own back? Is it about, you did this to me, I'm going to do that to you? Is it that simple? Is it that fundamental? Are the characters in it what they actually seem to be? Because that's where the true problem of analysis and interpretation comes. We can only judge characters on what they say. That's all we have, the words they speak. But the words they speak to one another and between one another very often are at variance from one set of thoughts to another, from one person to another. Are the characters what they seem to be? Or are they, in fact, a satire on the nature of power and property and commerce? Is the lovely, gentle Antonio a nice, lovely, gentle person? Or is he a businessman who's made a couple of bad choices? To what extent? Here's another one. Well, I'll come to that one, Ken. Yeah, because that's another. To what extent is Shylock a committed Jew, a practicing, as we would understand it? I'm not saying all the way to being Hasidic, but to being a practicing Jew. Because there is it is almost halfway through the play before Shylock uses a very significant word, synagogue. Halfway through the play. Is it a play about prejudice? I think I can almost say now, yes, it is. It is about prejudice. It is about prejudice on every side. Not simply the fundamental argument of the play, but right the way through the play, we keep coming across this inherent prejudice. Is it a play about justice? I've already mentioned that one. I told you I had to redo my notes, so I might repeat myself. So the next question that it begs is, where should our sympathies lie? When you go to see a play, when you read a play, but particularly when you go to see a play, you inevitably, it is a human condition, part of the human condition of watching a play, that you find sympathy. You are in a state of sympathy and indeed empathy with certain characters. Who in this play should we sympathize with? Should we sympathize with any of them? Is that is that even an argument one can follow? Where should our sympathies lie? And speaking of lies, how much lying actually goes on in the play? How often in this play do characters tell lies, and which ones are they? More important, which characters don't tell lies? And by lies, I don't mean a simple untruth. I mean deception, a level of deceit whereby you are misleading to the point of being dangerous. How many characters do that, and which ones don't? Now, in these discussions, this one and the next 2 weeks, I can't even hope to answer all those questions. But what we will do is take a look at what some of the characters in the play actually say, and take a look at what they truly mean. What is the veracity? Is justice lying? Is fairness lying? Is mercy lying? Look at it. The plot. You've got a merchant with an overextended investment. He's put every dollar he has into 3 ships. Everything. So he's not a very clever merchant, but he is a very greedy one. Because if that big risk pays off, he will end up, each ship will bring back 3 times its value. So he will be 9 times richer than he was when the ship set off. So it's a stupid investment. It's a massive risk. It's venture capitalism at a level we only understand today, or at least pre-COVID. But he also has a very, very, very close friend called Bassanio who needs a loan. Why does he need a loan? Because he's also needs some venture capital, because there's this rich girl who lives nearby, and if he can make the right choice out of this weird condition of the will her father left, he gets to marry her and become the boss of her property, and her enormous wealth. Doesn't sound like a love story to me. Sounds like a merchant trading. And Antonio, who is already totally overextended, cares so much for this friend, and yes, there is certainly an underscoring of affection between Antonio and Bassanio that goes beyond let's go out and have a cocktail. Antonio, to my mind, again, to my opinion, is completely in love with Bassanio. And Bassanio completely exploits that love. Where does justice lie? Where is truth? So Antonio makes the decision to borrow the money for the friend. A decision to borrow at interest, to pay usury from a very wealthy person, a guy with a lot of money who will charge interest, which was not permitted to Christians, but the Jews could do that. So he goes to borrow money from the Jew. And this is despite his inherent hatred of Jews and payment of interest, of usury. But he takes the loan with an apparently ridiculous repayment scheme. Now, we all know when we borrow money, be it from loan sharks or credit cards or the bank, you've got to go through enormous detail of what you can pay back, when you pay it back, how you pay it back, and what level of interest, which they always call APR, which is very confusing because it actually ends up as being much more than you thought it was going to be. Shylock has already recognized that Antonio does not like paying interest. Shylock wants to be one of the guys. I'm just like you. The only difference is I'm a Jew. I breathe like you. I have winter and summer like you. I bleed like you. I laugh like you. What's the difference between us? The only difference is I am a Jew. Why can't you just accept me for what I am? But I'll lend you the money. Now it is argued, if you were an allegedly clever business person and somebody said, yeah, I'll lend you what would be the equivalent of $3 million, but you have to promise that if you don't pay, I can take a pound of flesh from you by such a day, such a time, long after your boats are meant to come back. So it's a joke. I want to do this. I'm not going to charge you any interest. That's the only condition. And it is a joke. Antonio must believe it's a joke because no sane person would ever sign to such a bond. Bassanio saying, no, he wouldn't do that. No. Antonio says, it's fine. I'm going to be okay. I actually see where the Jew is coming from. This is a merry bond, meaning it's a joke. A merry bond is a joke bond. He's never going to claim on it. And Shylock doesn't expect to claim on it. That's my argument. So if this is true, that Shylock creates a deal where he'll lend the money with no interest and with a joke conclusion to the bond, does Shylock change, or is he always plotting against Antonio? Now, I've just put forward an argument that said, no, he changes because he's not plotting against Antonio. If you argue that he is plotting against Antonio, why does somebody as intelligent, allegedly, as Antonio, not see through it? Is it just because he's so besotted with Bassanio that he would be willing to enter such a bond? These are the questions you must ask. How much, if Shylock does change, how much does the elopement of Shylock's daughter Jessica cause the change, and why? Because Shylock keeps a strict Jewish house. She lives as an Orthodox Jewish daughter should live. He keeps his house closed up. Nothing unusual in that. You do not demonstrate it is an issue within Jewish faith and indeed in Islamic faith. You do not show your wealth on the outside. You do not shame your neighbors. You keep your wealth within. How you live inside your house is one set of rules. How you live outside is another. Shylock maintains a formal Orthodox Jewish regime. Jessica hates it. She's a young girl, and she's met a Christian boy, and she wants him, and she elopes with him, and she takes money, and she takes jewels. That's the important point. Shylock does go through change, but what causes that change? Is it the betrayal by his daughter? Is it the loss of the money? My daughter and my ducats. And he's certainly upset when Tubal tells him she's spending money right, left, and center. But what actually causes that change to occur? Is it the ring? Is it the ring that she exchanges for a monkey? What evidence do we have? And it is one of those, I think it's the most central moment in the play, and we'll discuss it again in the next couple of weeks. But it is at that moment when Shylock says, it was my turquoise. He knows exactly what ring she gave without being told. I had it of Leah when I was a bachelor. His wife, when they were still just dating, gave him this ring. I would not have changed it for a wilderness of monkeys. And it is after that moment that Shylock says, meet me at our synagogue. First time he's mentioned any religious observance. First time he has mentioned the synagogue. Is that a change that causes Shylock to look again at the bond, the merry bond, and say, I can do this? What about Portia? The lovely Portia living at Belmont with her 3 caskets and the various people coming to choose her. Who chooses the right casket gets her money, gets her house, gets everything. What does the father's will imply? It implies that whoever gets her gets everything. Because the father does not believe a daughter can usefully inherit his property. It is the deeply misogynistic belief that if you have a daughter, she better get a husband because the husband has to look after her. That's the purpose of that will. What does she want as a suitable husband? Well, we see 3 potentials come. We see the Duke of Morocco, who chooses badly. But we also see a little bit about her attitude when he leaves. When his choice fails, as he's gone, her line is, "Let all of your complexion choose me so." She does not want a person of color. When Aragon comes, he is older, and she does not want a person who is old. She's racist, she's ageist. Then Bassanio comes. Smart talker, good looking, young, local, he'll do. Is it a love story? You have to go searching to find out whether it is or not. How does Bassanio feel when he knows he's got Portia? Very, very secure financially, in terms of a home, in terms of having a wife. He feels very secure. And yet he also has a deep affection for Antonio. How deep is for you to surmise. The trial, which is not actually a trial, it's a hearing. How fair is the Duke? How independent, how just is the overwhelming justicer, if you like. The Duke has the power of life and death. The Duke wields justice. How fair is the Duke? When you examine the text, when you examine the beginning of that scene, and the welcome that Antonio receives, and the lack of welcome that Shylock receives, I would be very, very unsecure if I thought I was on trial in front of that judge when his mate was the person that I was that was bringing me to court. And that leads us. I mean, I've many of these questions are nearly done, but that leads us to Portia's homily on mercy. Portia does one of the most famous speeches in the play. The quality of mercy is not strained. When you look at that speech, when you examine it, you must now examine, because she has set out her stall in the marketplace. My stall is mercy. How much mercy does she exhibit? How much mercy does she show? Does she show any mercy on Shylock? Does she use very obscure trickery to convict Shylock? Why does the court and Antonio make Shylock become a Christian? Why do they do that? Now, the argument I put forward earlier, that for an Elizabethan audience is a happy ending because the wicked Jew becomes a Christian and therefore finds salvation and can go to heaven. It's one argument. But is that what's going on in that room? When you look at the script, when you look at the words that are written, when you look at what the characters say, is this salvation or punishment? Why they make him give away all his money, everything, every single dime, which will destroy him. You take my life when you do take the prop that doth sustain my life. He lives by money. He is a merchant. They are doing to him what Antonio did to himself, taking everything away, leaving him totally exposed. Is this justice? Is this mercy? Why does Antonio get back everything that he lost? What is Shakespeare telling us at the end of the play? And what might Jessica believe of her inheritance? All the money that Shylock had is now hers, but it's not hers. It goes to her Christian husband. So That's 24 questions. And every one of those questions need to be examined. I mean, in the profession, before any director or any group of actors can even begin to approach the text for interpretation, you have to examine those questions. You have to find out, as you read the text, what does the text teach you to answer those questions? And only at that point can you decide, this is how we're going to approach the play. So over the next two, we're nearly time. Over the next two seminars, we're going to, I've got some of the picked company who did the play with me a couple of years ago, who will be reading some passages from it. And we're going to just examine some of those questions and see how they stand up against a conventional understanding of the play, either as justice or tragedy for Shylock. Greg, how could that audience have heard the affection of two men merely platonic? In Shakespearean times, I think you refer, because there was a lot of it going on. It's not a modern phenomenon, and the audience would have understood perfectly well what the affection of the two men was. In fact, Henry VIII was the one, I believe, who elevated the crime of sodomy to be a capital offense, and you could be executed for it. That kind of affection and the understanding of that is not modern. It's been going on for as long as man bumped into man. So yeah, I think the audience would have understood that. Also, they understood the platonic friendship. They understood that notion, but they also understood the deeper affection. It is arguable that the affection between Antonio and Bassanio is purely platonic. You can have that argument and you can substantiate it, but you can equally substantiate that it was more. There are too many moments in the play where it is more. Any other questions out there before we move on? Yes, that is true. Antonio, Ken, well done. Antonio seems to be making a lot of his business decisions, with a part of his anatomy other than his brain. Yes, that is very true. And of course, that is a fundamental weakness in Antonio that Shylock would never be guilty of. Shylock thinks fairly, honestly, and justly throughout all the play. One thing you cannot accuse Shylock of is lying, dissembling, or being unjust. He only seeks justice, and he behaves in such a fashion. You could argue that Shylock was thinking of his own need or desire to be one of the guys when he makes that loan without interest. But Antonio, on the other hand, definitely does, as I say, he is completely overextended, and then because of Bassanio, he goes and borrows more. Stupid business decision. A businessman wouldn't do that. But this is about love and the stupid things we do for love. So, yes, we're out of time. Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed that. I'll try next week to have my notes saved so I don't have to type them all out an hour before the webinar. But next week we'll be joined by some actors and we'll take a look at just some of the questions that we've been positing. If you have any other questions you want, please send me an email. I'd be delighted to get back to you. I apologize. We had a very busy week. One of the reasons being, I'm happy to say, I've just appointed a new associate producer to the company. So we were doing that all of last week as well. So if I haven't got a reply to you from last week, I will over the weekend, I promise. Any questions from this week, please send an email. We'll be delighted. Don't forget, go to the website. If you want to look at this again, if you want to check over the 24 questions, it's all there on our YouTube channel. Do subscribe to the channel. Do invite your friends to subscribe as well. It really does make a huge difference to us. And if you have that spare few dollars or euro or whatever in your purse, in your pocketbook, in your wallet, or anywhere, do consider just pushing the button on our website and make a small donation. All donations really gratefully received. In the meantime, for those of you here or anywhere, have a wonderful 4th of July weekend. I hope it stays lovely for the day and Monday, because we get an extra day. And apart from that, we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot. Bye.